So we have talked about measures of the center, we've talked about measures of spread or variation, and so in our last section we're going to talk about ranking. And so the two things we're going to talk about, so quartiles and percentiles are the common measures of ranking in a data set. So percentiles are very useful for comparing values in a data set. You may have taken a college entrance exam and found out what percentile you scored in on the test. For example, suppose you scored in the 85th percentile on the math portion of the SATs. What does that tell you? Did you do well? How will that compare with others who took the same test? So percentiles tell you sort of the position. So you did 85% better than everyone else. But it doesn't mean you got an 85. You could have gotten a 95. You could have gotten a 60. It just, whoever took that exam, you did 85% better than everyone else. So the K percentile is the data value that has K% of the data at or below that value. Percentiles can also be found if you have younger children and they go to a doctor. They a lot of times talk about the percentiles of their height and weight, and so they compare it to other kids that age, sort of where they measure up. Are they lower on the lower end, middle, or high end? So the other thing that we can talk about are quartiles. So the quartiles are special locations in a data set. There are 3 quartiles. The first quartile or lower quartile. The second quartile, the middle quartile, it's actually the same as the median. And then the third quartile, which is our upper quartile. So what we actually do first is we actually find the middle quartile or quartile 2, which is the median. So it divides the lower 50% of the data set from the upper 50% of the data set. This is just the median of the data set, same as the 50th percentile. We then can find the lower quartile, which divides the lower 25% of the data set from the upper 75% of the data set, same as the 25th percentile, and quartile 3, which divides the lower 75% of the data set from the upper 25% of the data set, same as the 75th percentile. So let me draw maybe a little chart down here for you guys. So, all right, I have my chart here. So we have, right, quartile 1, quartile 2, quartile 3, right? So from sort of the beginning to quartile 1, this represents 25% of the data. From quartile 1 to quartile 2 is another 25%. Quartile 2 to quartile 3 is 25%. And then quartile, let me erase it so it looks a little bit more on the same side. Quartile 3 to sort of the upper or the highest value is the other 25%. And so we could say this is like the lowest value and then this is the highest value. And we'll actually talk about this being called the 5-number summary. It's a 5-number summary of the data. So, and if you think, right, from quartile 1 to quartile 3, that represents 50% of the data. So there are several ways to calculate quartiles. We'll look at 2 techniques. The calculator is the easiest way, and then we will go through and do one of them by hand so you can sort of see what we do. But definitely on the homework, use a calculator to save yourself some time. So let's take a look at our first example. It says, given the heights of students in a class, find the quartiles using the calculator and by hand. So let's go through and do this by hand. So the first thing that we want to do is count the number of pieces of data that I have, right? So let's see. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, so there's 8 in a row. There's 3 rows. So that gives me 24, and then I have 3 in the last row. So it looks like there's 27 pieces of data. So the first thing that we want to do is actually find quartile 2. So quartile 2. And so that's, right, is the median. And so what we would say is, okay, if there's 27 pieces of data, we learned this in the last section, we add 1 and divide by 2. So I have 28 pieces of data divided by 2. So my middle number, right, my median should be the 14th piece of data. Let's go through and count this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And I should note that this data is already in order for us. So remember with our median, we would first want to put it from lowest to highest. So it's nice because it's already done that for us. So 68 would be my quartile 2. So what I want to do now is I'm going to partition the lower half of the data and the upper half of the data. And what I want to do is find the median of the lower half of the data, that'll be quartile 1, and then the median of the upper half, and that'll be quartile 3. So if I look from 59 to that 67, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, right, 13 pieces of data. So for quartile 1, right, so there's 13 pieces of data. We're going to add 1 to it and divide by 2. So I have 14 divided by 2. So we're looking at the 7th position. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it looks like it's this 64, right? That's quartile 1, quartile 2, and quartile, so we'd have quartile 1, right, is 64. And then we have quartile 3 that we have to find, and we'll sort of sum it all up at the end. So quartile 3, right, again, there should be 13 values plus 1 divided by 2. We should still be looking at the 7th position. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it looks like the 70th, or 70 is. So that's quartile 3. So quartile 1, right, is 64, we said. Quartile 2, which is the median, which is 68. And quartile 3, which is 70. So that is the by hand method. So if we want to do this in our calculator, right, especially if the data is not in order, it's easier to throw it into our calculator to do this. So again, anytime we want to enter data, we're going to go into our stat. We're going to go into edit. We'll clear out all this data, and then we're going to enter this in. So let's go through and just enter this really quick into our calculator. I know there's lots of pieces of data, so as I'm entering it into mine, go ahead and enter it into yours. Remember, it doesn't matter the order that it's in, just as long as you have it all in there. So, 64, 265, 66, 67, 68. So making sure we're getting all those numbers there. Let's see, I have 3 69s, 1, 2, 3, 4. I need one more. 4 70s. So lots of pieces of data here. All right, 70, 71, 72, 73, and 80. Okay. All right, so we've entered everything in. Once we're done there, we're going to go back to our stat. We're going to go over to calculate and the 1 vars. We just want L1 in there, so we'll hit calculate. And again, in our case, we'll just care about the quartiles. So we're actually going to arrow all the way down till it stops. And it tells us what the minimum value is, right? What quartile 1 is, median, quartile 3, and the max. And what's nice, and we didn't really talk about this, but you can find the range pretty easily from the max minus the min. But you'll notice, right, I have quartile 1 is 64, the median or quartile 2, which is 68, and quartile 3, which is 70, which is what we found over here. So it matches what we found. So this is an alternative way to do it in our calculator that's definitely a lot faster. And so this would usually be the method that we prefer.